Coronations are a declaration of our hopes for the future. And I know she's up there, fondly keeping an eye on us, and she'll be a very proud mother.
The sound came first, the slow, echoing toll of the bells at Windsor Castle. Then came the silence. Moments later, the nation learned what the silence meant. King Charles III, his voice breaking beneath the vaulted ceilings of St. George's Hall, had spoken words no monarch had uttered in nearly a century. "It is time," he said quietly, "for the crown to rest on younger shoulders." No headlines could soften the weight of those 6 words. It was not just a statement of abdication, it was a farewell drenched in sorrow, whispered through trembling breath. For years, the king had stood as a symbol of endurance, weathering illness, criticism, and the long shadow of history. But on this October evening, his strength seemed to flicker like the candlelight that danced across the hall's ancient stone walls. Those in attendance described the scene as otherworldly. The chandeliers had been dimmed to amber glow. The imperial state crown sat before him, not on his head, but upon a velvet cushion, like a relic awaiting its next keeper. The atmosphere was heavy, reverent, as if the castle itself understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Prince William stood nearby, his expression caught between duty and disbelief. Beside him, Princess Catherine's eyes glistened, her hands clasped in quiet prayer. They were no longer merely the heirs, they were witnesses to the moment when a kingdom changed course. For Charles, this was not defeat. It was a final act of devotion. His illness had taken his body, but not his sense of responsibility. And so, with the calm of a man who had already made peace with destiny, he chose to speak one last truth, a message that would not only shake Britain, but alter the line of the crown forever. Stay with me, because the king's final declaration, one that names William and Catherine in a way no one expected, would redefine the monarchy itself. In the months leading up to that haunting evening at Windsor Castle, the signs had been there hidden beneath ceremony, smiles, and perfectly worded palace statements. The king's health had been fragile for some time, but his will to serve had remained unshaken. Even as the illness progressed, King Charles refused to step away. He continued his morning routine, reviewing government dispatches, meeting ministers, and writing letters in his own careful script. To those around him, this quiet persistence was both admirable and painful to watch. Behind palace doors, however, reality was taking its toll. His once strong voice had softened. His posture, once commanding, now trembled with effort. Advisors urged him to reduce his workload, but Charles, ever the traditionalist, insisted, "The monarchy does not pause for one man." He believed that service was his purpose, the one thing keeping him alive. Yet there was one change no one could ignore: the gradual emergence of Prince William and Princess Catherine. What began as occasional substitutions at royal engagements soon became a quiet transfer of authority. William started chairing meetings with ministers. Catherine attended audiences once reserved for the Queen Consort. It was a transition executed with precision, slow enough to seem natural, but deliberate enough to signal that something monumental was unfolding behind the scenes. Inside Clarence House, courtiers whispered of private family meetings where Charles began to speak not as a ruler, but as a father preparing to let go. He reportedly told William, "The crown must never falter, even if I must." Those who heard the exchange said it was the first time the king had admitted what everyone already feared: his illness was winning. Meanwhile, the royal archives stirred with quiet activity. A rare order was given to relocate several crown jewels from the Tower of London to Windsor's secure vaults, under the guise of inventory preservation. But insiders recognize the symbolism when the jewels move. The crown itself is in motion. The British press, ever observant, began to sense a shift. Columnists wrote cautiously about continuity planning. Foreign media speculated about the first voluntary abdication since Edward VIII. And yet, even amid rumor and uncertainty, the king remained steadfastly silent, as though saving his final words for one moment only. The first ripples of unease began weeks before the abdication was announced. At first, they were small: a postponed public appearance here, an unexplained absence there, the kind of minor disruptions that the palace press office could smooth over, with phrases like routine rest or private time with family. But by early October, those ripples had turned into waves that no one could ignore. It began with the sudden cancellation of the king's scheduled address at Westminster Abbey, where he was to deliver a speech on unity and climate resilience, causes closest to his heart. The statement that followed was vague, written in the familiar guarded tone of royal press releases. His Majesty is advised to remain at Windsor for continued recuperation. Yet something about the wording felt different. It lacked the confident phrasing the palace usually used, as though even its authors no longer believed in reassurance. Reporters stationed outside Windsor noticed new patterns in the king's routine. Curtains that once opened with the morning sun now stayed drawn until midday. The royal standard, traditionally flown when the sovereign was in residence, began to fluctuate, inexplicably raised one day, lowered the next. "It's like the flag itself doesn't know what's happening inside," one journalist remarked on live television. Then came the late-night movement that ignited the storm. At 2 in the morning on October 8th, security cameras caught a black motorcade leaving the castle's north gate, escorted by police and a discreet ambulance. Within hours, photos flooded social media and speculation exploded. The palace, under pressure, issued a short response. His Majesty remains in stable condition and continues to receive the best medical care. The phrase, stable condition, so familiar, so ominous, sent a chill through the nation. Behind closed doors, the truth was far more fragile. The king had endured another severe health episode. His doctors urged immediate rest, warning that even a single public appearance could endanger his recovery. But for Charles, rest had never been an option. "If the people must see a king," he reportedly told his aides, "then they shall, even if I can only stand for a moment." Meanwhile, Prince William and Princess Catherine found themselves thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. The couple had returned early from an official visit to Scotland, fueling rumors that the situation was deteriorating. For days, they remained unseen until October 10th, when they emerged hand in hand to attend a private prayer service at St. George's Chapel. Cameras captured Catherine, placing a hand gently on William's arm as they entered. It was a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes, a queenly composure that balanced his burdened silence. That same night, the imperial state crown was quietly moved from public display at the Tower of London back to Windsor's secure vault. The palace claimed it was for routine restoration, but historians recognized the symbolism immediately. "That crown doesn't move unless the future is being written," one royal expert explained gravely. The next morning, London woke to headlines filled with dread and disbelief. Crowds began to gather outside Buckingham Palace, laying white lilies along the gates. In towns and cities across Britain, church bells rang softly at noon. Television anchors spoke with lowered voices, switching from news to live vigils. For many, it felt like the closing chapter of a story that had begun the moment Queen Elizabeth II passed the torch to her son. Across the Commonwealth, the emotional resonance was unmistakable. In Canada, flags were lowered to half-mast. In New Zealand, cathedral bells chimed in sympathy. In Sydney, the sails of the Opera House were illuminated in deep royal blue, a tribute to both legacy and endurance. One Australian commentator summed it up perfectly. "We may live under different skies, but tonight we all feel the same heartbreak." And perhaps you, watching now, feel that too. Where are you joining us from today? Which city or country are you watching from as this extraordinary story unfolds? Share it in the comments below. Let's see how far across the world this moment of history is reaching. Back in Windsor, preparations had already begun for what insiders called Operation Continuity. The hall was being prepared for a broadcast. The king's letter had been written, and under the dim light of the chapel, Prince William stood in silence, reading words that would soon change his life and the monarchy forever. The next morning, the bells would toll again, but this time, they would not announce tragedy, they would mark transition. By dawn on October 11th, 2025, Windsor Castle was locked in a silence so heavy that even the guards avoided eye contact. The king's final message had been drafted, reviewed, and sealed overnight. Outside, the autumn fog clung to the castle walls like a shroud, swallowing the sound of footsteps on cobblestones. Within those stone corridors, an invisible countdown had begun to the moment the king would surrender the crown he had waited his entire life to wear. The preparations were meticulous, almost sacred. St. George's Hall, chosen for its history and grandeur, had been transformed into a chamber of farewell. Velvet banners hung motionless, and long mahogany tables gleamed under soft candlelight. At the front, on a single raised dais, rested the imperial state crown, the sovereign's orb, and the royal scepter, the physical symbols of monarchy. Each one had been transported under tight security from the Tower of London the night before. Tradition dictated their presence at the moment of transition, even if the handover was only ceremonial. In an adjoining room, King Charles III sat at a desk once used by Queen Elizabeth II. His face was pale, the lines deeper than ever, but his composure remained royal. Before him lay the final document, the instrument of abdication, bearing the royal cipher CR, and the faint indentation of trembling hands. 2 signatures were required, his own and the Prime Minister's, confirming the crown's peaceful transfer of authority. Princess Anne entered quietly, her expression resolute. For decades, she had been her brother's anchor, the one constant voice of reason amid public storms. "You're certain?" she asked softly, her tone devoid of plea, only understanding. Charles smiled faintly. "Certainty is the one gift illness gives," he replied, setting his pen to the page. With a deliberate motion, he signed his name. The scratching of the pen on parchment was the only sound in the room, the sound of an era ending. Elsewhere in the castle, Prince William and Princess Catherine were being briefed by senior advisors. The tone was practical, almost clinical, an outline of what would happen over the next 24 hours. There would be no immediate coronation, only an announcement of succession and the king's personal wishes. Still, the weight of the conversation was undeniable. William kept his eyes on the papers before him, though he seemed barely to read them. Catherine, ever calm, listened intently, her hand resting over his. When the advisor mentioned Her Majesty the future Queen, William looked up not with pride, but with disbelief. "He's still my father," he said quietly. "He's not gone." "No," the advisor agreed, "but he is ready." In another wing of the castle, Queen Camilla paced her private quarters. She had been informed of the abdication only hours earlier, and though she had expected it in her heart, the confirmation struck like a blow. Her marriage to Charles had been a story of endurance, the slow acceptance of a love once condemned. To lose him now, not to death but to resignation, felt like erasure. "He is not stepping down," she murmured bitterly to her aide. "He is stepping away from me." But even in heartbreak, Camilla knew her role. Dignity in public, silence in private. She would not attend the broadcast that afternoon. Instead, she sent a handwritten note to the king's chamber. "Whatever the world sees, I will remember the man beneath the crown." Meanwhile, the Lord Chamberlain oversaw the orchestration of the announcement. Every angle of the hall was mapped for television. Every camera, every microphone positioned to capture solemnity without intrusion. The national broadcaster was briefed to switch feeds the moment the king began to speak. Behind the cameras, staff whispered prayers. Even seasoned aides, veterans of royal crises, admitted that this moment felt different, final, in a way no previous transition had. Just before noon, Charles was helped from his chair and escorted to the hall. The walk, though short, seemed endless. Aides later described him as calm, even serene. "He moved like a man walking toward history," one witness recalled. When he reached the dais, the crown jewels glimmered faintly in the dim light. The king paused, resting his hand lightly on the scepter's handle, the same scepter he had held on Coronation Day barely 2 years earlier. Then he turned toward the small gathering of witnesses: William, Catherine, Anne, the Prime Minister, and a few senior clergy. "I have served to the measure of my strength," Charles began. "But strength, like time, is not ours to command." His voice wavered, but his gaze remained steady. "What I built, my son will carry forward. What I dreamed, my daughter-in-law will preserve. For in them, the crown finds not only heirs, but hope." There was no applause, no ceremony, only the muffled sound of a quill being set down beside the royal seal. As the king left the hall, the crown remained where it was untouched, waiting. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering golden leaves across the courtyard. Reporters gathered by the gates could sense that something extraordinary had happened, though the palace had yet to confirm it. Inside, William stood in the now empty hall, staring at the crown that had just been released into his care. And somewhere deep in the castle, a single bell rang, not in mourning, but in acknowledgement. The monarchy, once again, had changed hands, not through death, but through love. At exactly 3 p.m. on October 11th, 2025, the United Kingdom came to a standstill. Television screens turned black for a moment, then flickered to life with the royal crest gold against deep blue. The words appeared, "Live from Windsor Castle." Millions of viewers across the Commonwealth held their breath as the frame opened to reveal King Charles III, seated alone in street. George's hall bathed in a soft amber light. He looked fragile but composed. The shadows under his eyes betrayed months of struggle, yet his presence still carried the quiet dignity of a monarch born to serve. Behind him, the imperial state crown rested beneath glass, glimmering faintly. To his left, a small family portrait, William, Catherine, and their 3 children had been placed deliberately, a symbol of continuity that needed no words. For a long moment, the king said nothing. Then, in a voice steadier than anyone expected, he began. "My beloved people," he said, "I have long carried the weight of this sacred duty, and it has been the greatest honor of my life. But there comes a time when service must give way to stewardship, when the torch must be passed, not in defeat, but in trust." A pause, long, deliberate. The camera zoomed slightly closer. His hands trembled faintly as he continued. "I have battled illness with courage, but the crown cannot be ruled from a sickbed. My duty now is to ensure that the monarchy, this ancient bond between sovereign and people, remains strong, stable, and renewed." Gasps rippled through living rooms across Britain as he uttered the next words. "Therefore, I have chosen to step down as your king, with the assurance that the future of this realm rests safely in the hands of my son, Prince William, and his devoted wife, Princess Catherine, who will one day reign as King and Queen of the United Kingdom." The nation erupted not in applause, but in stunned silence. The image of Charles, speaking those words beneath the vaulted ceiling, would become one of the defining moments of modern royal history. In the front rows of the hall, Prince William lowered his head, visibly overwhelmed. Catherine reached out, her fingers gently brushing his hand, a moment of human tenderness that millions watching would later describe as the touch that sealed the monarchy's future. Outside, the reaction was instant. The crowds gathered beyond Windsor's gates broke into tears. Some shouted, "Long live the king!" while others simply bowed their heads in silence. Around the world, cathedrals began ringing bells in unison. Westminster Abbey, St. Paul's, even St. Mary's in Sydney. The sound of hope and heartbreak merged across continents. Meanwhile, inside Windsor, not everyone shared the same calm. Queen Camilla, who had refused to attend the broadcast, reportedly watched from her private chamber. When she heard her husband's declaration, the public recognition of William and Catherine as king and queen of the future, she was said to have turned pale. To those near her, she whispered, "He's given it all away." For decades, Camilla had been both companion and survivor, weathering criticism, exile, and scrutiny to stand by Charles's side. Now, in a single moment, that position had shifted from power to memory. It wasn't jealousy, it was grief, the quiet kind that comes when a lifetime's purpose dissolves in a single sentence. Princess Anne, ever the dutiful sister, stepped into the silence that followed. She approached Charles after the address, bowed her head, and kissed his hand. "You've done what Mother would have done," she said softly, "and what few could." When the speech ended, the palace released the king's written declaration, 3 pages long, signed in the crimson ink of the sovereign's seal. It closed with a line destined for history books. "I step down not as a king retreating from duty, but as a father entrusting his family and his people to the promise of tomorrow." That evening, across the United Kingdom, people gathered in pubs, churches, and homes to watch the replay. Some cried openly, others simply stared in disbelief. Never before had a British monarch voluntarily abdicated in the name of love and renewal. As the night deepened, Windsor Castle glowed with candlelight. The royal flag was lowered to half-mast, not in mourning but in transition. The crown had not yet passed, but its direction was set, and in one of the castle's quiet corridors, Prince William stood alone, looking up at the portrait of his father newly hung on the wall. He whispered only 3 words, "I'll honor this." The echo of those words, carried by the still night air, seemed to linger a vow from son to father, from future to past. The day after the king's abdication speech, Britain felt strangely weightless, suspended between endings and beginnings. News outlets replayed his final words on a loop, their voices hushed, reverent. Even the usually cynical tabloids printed his portrait in black and white, framed with the headline, "The Monarch Who Let Go." Outside Windsor Castle, thousands gathered beneath gray October skies, holding flowers and flags. The air smelled faintly of rain and candle wax. Many came not to mourn, but to thank him for his humility, his humanity, and the quiet grace with which he had stepped away from the world's oldest throne. Across the gates hung a handwritten banner, "You served us with love. Rest now, our king." Inside the palace, the transition had already begun. Prince William rose before dawn, greeted by a flood of messages from world leaders offering congratulations and condolences in equal measure. Though his father's abdication was effective immediately, there would be no coronation yet, not until the proper ceremonies could be arranged. For now, the nation existed under a phrase not seen since the early 20th century. The king's son, acting in trust. William's first act as sovereign-in-waiting was a meeting with the Privy Council. He arrived without fanfare, in a simple navy suit, accompanied by Princess Catherine, who remained silent but composed. Those who witnessed the meeting described the atmosphere as electric, not because of authority, but because of calm. William spoke with clarity, thanking the council for its service and reaffirming the crown's commitment to unity, compassion, and renewal. Meanwhile, Catherine began assuming her quiet new role in the public eye. That same morning, she visited a children's hospital in London, bringing flowers sent by the former king. Cameras captured the moment she spoke softly to a patient. "The world keeps changing, but kindness doesn't." The image spread like wildfire, hailed by international media as the first act of the future queen. Not everyone within the family was ready to move forward. Queen Camilla remained at her private residence, Raymil House, far from the public eye. Reports suggested she had declined to attend post-abdication meetings and refused all interviews. Friends close to her described her as heartbroken but resolute, determined to preserve the king's dignity in silence. She had spent years defending their love against the tides of public opinion. Now, she faced the final test of devotion, letting him go without resentment. Princess Anne, characteristically stoic, became the quiet architect of stability. She coordinated directly with palace staff, overseeing the day-to-day logistics of transition. Her name rarely appeared in headlines, but insiders admitted, without Anne, the crown's rhythm would have faltered. Beyond the castle walls, the world watched with awe. Parliament opened with a prayer for the king's health. The Prime Minister gave a televised address praising Charles's selflessness, calling it the act of a true servant of the people. In Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, government buildings were draped in royal purple. Even the White House released a statement describing the abdication as an extraordinary gesture of courage and continuity. Public sentiment swelled with emotion. Polls showed nearly 80% of Britons supported William's succession and believed the monarchy had entered a new era of hope. Younger generations, long indifferent to royal affairs, began sharing messages online with the tag number "Crown Renewed." The monarchy, it seemed, had rediscovered its heartbeat. And through it all, King Charles remained unseen, resting in his private quarters. Those close to him said he spent hours walking the gardens of Windsor, sometimes with Anne, sometimes alone. He spoke little, but when asked if he regretted stepping down, he simply replied, "No, the future is in good hands." As the sun set on that extraordinary week, the bells of Westminster tolled again, not in farewell, but in blessing. Britain had witnessed something no one expected: a king choosing peace over power, and a family rediscovering its unity in the shadow of sacrifice. The monarchy, long burdened by its past, now looked toward dawn, a new reign waiting to begin, built not on authority, but on love. As night fell over Windsor, the castle that had witnessed so many beginnings now stood witness to an ending and a rebirth. The great halls were quiet, the chandeliers dimmed to a golden glow. Outside, the wind carried the faint murmur of a waiting crowd, their candles flickering like stars scattered across the royal grounds. The British monarchy had weathered wars, scandals, and centuries of change, but never before had it seen a king lay down his crown with such deliberate grace. In his private chamber, King Charles III sat by the window, gazing out at the courtyard below. His breathing was slower now, his reflection faint against the glass. On the table beside him rested a single envelope, sealed with crimson wax, addressed simply, "To my son." It was said that inside was his final blessing, not for a monarch, but for a man, a message from a father to his heir. Down the corridor, Prince William and Princess Catherine stood together in the long gallery. The portraits of past sovereigns lined the walls: Henry, Victoria, Elizabeth, each ruler's gaze following them like silent witnesses to history. Catherine broke the silence first. "He's given us everything," she whispered. "Now we have to make it mean something." William nodded. His eyes lingered on the portrait of his grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, her calm expression still radiating duty and devotion. "He's taught us that the crown isn't about power," he said softly. "It's about service. Always has been." That was the lesson Charles had left behind, one larger than monarchy, one that echoed far beyond the walls of Windsor. Leadership, he had shown, is not measured by how long one holds on, but by how bravely one lets go. True strength lies not in domination, but in the humility to know when others must carry the torch forward. And legacy, in the end, is not a monument carved in stone, but a set of values passed quietly from heart to heart. The world would remember him as the king who chose peace over pride, the monarch who reminded his people, and perhaps the world, that service is the highest form of greatness. His abdication wasn't a surrender. It was a final act of devotion. Outside the castle, the bells tolled again, soft, steady, and solemn. Across the globe, lights glimmered in tribute, the Eiffel Tower shimmering in gold, the Sydney Harbour Bridge illuminated in royal purple, New York's skyline glowing faintly in white. From London to Toronto, from Cape Town to Delhi, people stood still, united by a single moment of history, the quiet transfer of a crown, the dawn of a new chapter. As the king's window dimmed for the night, the words he spoke in his final broadcast echoed once more. "May the crown always serve the people, never rule them." If this story moved you, if you believe, like King Charles, that leadership means service and legacy means love, take a moment to like this video in his honor. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and share what this moment means to you. And if you wish to follow every new step of William and Catherine's journey as the future king and queen, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because history is still being written, and the next chapter of the British monarchy has only just begun.